Good evening, everyone. Sorry for the delay. Thank you for joining us from, well, I guess wherever you are tonight. My name's Ross, and I'm joining you live from Kingston. I'm a joint JD MPA student here in 2L, and I'm also the president of the Law Student Society, or LSS, and I'll be your host this evening. I'd like to start by giving a special welcome to all our reunion classes tonight. And bear with me because there's a couple of them. Tonight we have with us the graduating classes from Law 60, 65, 70, 75, 80, 85, 90, 95, 2000, 2005, 2010, and 2015. So welcome all. Thank you for being here with us tonight. We have a great group of speakers lined up for you tonight. Following them, we're going to have a live question and answer period. I'll explain more how that's going to work as we get there. And also, just a little FYI for you guys, Vice President of Advancement Karen Bertrand will be joining us in the next few minutes. She's going to be in the chat, so keep an eye out for her and say hello if you'd like. To start us off tonight, we're going to be hearing from our illustrious and a Queen's Law graduate himself, class of '89, our Dean, Mark Walters.
So, thank you, Ross, and welcome. I mean, it's a real privilege for me to welcome everyone here. Of course, we'd love to have seen you in person. On the other hand, there are many of you that may not have been able to travel in for an event to Kingston anyway. So there maybe are some virtues to a virtual meeting. I'm not going to speak for very long. I'm just about 10 minutes or so. And then we have with us several law professors and several students. And I think it's probably going to be more interesting for you to hear about their work and their experiences than just from the old dean. So I believe there's a PowerPoint presentation with slides, and is that visible to people? It's up? Okay. I can't actually see it, but oh, okay, I can see it now. Thank you. So let me just start with this slide and say something about strategic planning. We are in the midst of strategic planning at the moment for the law school. This is something every new dean does, and I'm not really a new dean. I've been on the job for over a year now, but our strategic planning process was delayed, like almost everything else, by the pandemic. So this is not such a bad thing because it gives us an opportunity to pause and reflect about where the law school is and where it's going. And so if you do wish to make comments or provide insights, suggestions, please do. If you go to our website, you'll find there's a page dedicated to strategic planning. There's a discussion paper that is meant to provoke thoughts and ideas, and you can get in touch. Well, you can just email me if you like. I'm open to hearing from alumni on all points at any time. It's actually one of the things that I've learned about this job in my first year, which is one of the most helpful things for me is just simply speaking to our graduates. Because you've been through the law school, you understand legal education, but now you have, in some cases, many years and decades, but in some cases, only a few years of experience. And your experience probably allows you to assess what works or what worked in your legal education, and you know what maybe could be improved, and we're always looking to improve naturally. Now, just back to this slide, who are these people? On the far left is David Sharp. He's the chair of the Dean's Council. He's also a member of the Queen's Board of Trustees. He's a member of the Mohawks of Tyndonega. and a great supporter of the law school. Last year, he made a generous gift to establish the Chief Don Miracle Indigenous Knowledge Initiative. On the far right is me, and then next to me is Mark Dockstader, who's a member of the Oneida of the Thames and a Mohawk as well. And he's the director of this new initiative. And then between Mark and David is Ann Deere, our Indigenous recruiter and coordinator in the law school. And I just wanted to mention this as one of the more recent initiatives that the law school is engaged in with respect to honoring the commitment to reconciliation that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has underscored for all law schools in Canada. For those of you who have come back to the law school and visited, you'll recognize the wampum belt display, which is found in the atrium. That's pictured as well. And then just quickly on this point, the painting above is a painting by Norval Morisseau of a water spirit. And that painting was just recently given to the law school by David Sharp. And we're looking forward to installing it in the next few weeks. So let's move on to the next slide. Just very quickly, how are we coping in this odd time? Well, the picture on the left is the scene of a typical classroom. We do have in-person, on-campus classes running in the law school, just some, not all of the courses are running in person, and even the in-person classes are hybrid in the sense that some students are there. You can see that they're spread out. That's a large classroom, and it contains, due to physical distancing rules, a handful of students. The other students are Zooming in. So it's a really awkward, to be honest, it is awkward as a method of teaching. And yet we thought it was important to provide at least some exposure to in-person teaching for our students, especially in first year. And the photo on the right is, as long as the weather holds, we can go outside, and that's Carla McGrath, the director of our legal clinics, and one of the clinics classes being held outside, which the advantage of being outside is students can at least take off their masks as long as they're physically distanced. So our student participants this evening may have a few more words to say about how they've experienced the interesting, I'll call it interesting times we're in. So on to the next slide then. So I think I should address what might be on some of your minds. It's controversial, and there's no way around the controversial nature of the name of the law school building and where things stand with that. You may know that over the course of the summer and much of September, there was a consultation process in place about whether the university should keep the name John A. Macdonald for the law school building. Just to bring you up to date on where things stand on this process, the advisory committee that was conducting those consultations has wrapped up its work and made a recommendation to me, and I've taken that and made a recommendation to the principal. The principal has taken all of those reports and recommendations and made a recommendation to the Board of Trustees, which has the authority over the issue. And they've asked that all of those reports and recommendations remain confidential for the moment until it has a chance to consider them and make a decision. So that's the awkward thing. I wish I could tell you more about where things have landed. But we won't have to wait long, I hope, because the Board of Trustees is meeting on Monday. And I'm hoping it will make a decision one way or the other. It might decide to delay and hold off, but I think it might be best for all of us to know where things stand and move on from there. I'm just going to say, I don't want to gloss over this. It has been heart-wrenching. It has been the hardest thing for me as dean so far to deal with this issue, because people on both sides feel so passionately about the issue. And they're divided. And so whatever the result is, about half of you will be really upset, and there's just no way around it. I can say that there were over 3,000 submissions during the consultation process, and the opinions did kind of divide equally on both sides. So I just wanted to bring you up to date on that deeply controversial issue. So maybe we could move on to the next slide. I want to make sure that I'm within my 10 minutes, and I know, Ross, you're going to cut me off exactly at 10 minutes, right? I want you to, because I want other people to have the full opportunity to speak. There's lots going on in the law school. Just as an example, the Center for Law in the Contemporary Workplace is holding workshops. It held one last Friday on the famous, now famous administrative law decision, Vavilov. The director of the center, Kevin Banks, had an article cited in the Supreme Court of Canada last week, a case on wrongful dismissal. And I bring that up just as an example of the way in which our faculty are engaged in research and scholarship, which continues to shape public policy and law in Canada. And that is one of our basic objectives as a law school. So moving on to the next slide. I want to mention research and scholarship. I've just talked about briefly. Another initiative that we have underway is it's part of a broader theme that is the subject of a lot of discussion and work in the university as a whole, and that is the place of, or the challenge of, dealing with race and racism. You may know that the Smith School of Business has been sort of grappling with this issue in a very sensitive way and difficult way. And so we've got an anti-racism working group that's up and running, and it's making recommendations. And I'm really pleased with the engagement of students and faculty on this really hard question. The photos here are of Cecil Fraser. He was the first Black law student to graduate from Queen's in 1961. And we've just launched a bursary for Black students named in honor of Cecil Fraser. And his family is just overjoyed by this way in which his legacy is being recognized. His son, actually, Hugh Fraser, is a graduate of Queen's in the undergraduate program. He went to law school elsewhere and is now a judge. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention, one of the initiatives that we have underway at the moment in terms of fundraising. So if we could move on to the next slide. I'm looking carefully. Yes, just quickly, very briefly, we have a new graduate diploma in immigration and citizenship law, which will be required by all new immigration consultants in Canada, which will launch in January of this year. And we're very excited about that development. I bet my time's running out, so I'm going to go on to the next slide. We've got, I can't see, I can't read the details here of the people, but we've got a number of award recipients. I think that's Hugh Christie on the left, Toronto labor law lawyer, who, and I cannot read the name of the award. They're all important awards, let me just say. And then I think next to him is Blaine Favell, who is a graduate, actually, I think Law 90, former, he's a member of the Pound Maker Cree Nation from Saskatchewan, and completed his term as the Chancellor of the University of Saskatchewan a few years ago. Next to him is Alan McGavin, who's a corporate lawyer in Vancouver and just a fantastic contributor to Queen's alumni organizations. Moving to the next slide, we've honored as well Betty Del Bianco, who recently stepped down and retired after many years as the Chief Legal and Administrative Officer for Celestica. Again, fantastic supporter of Queen's Law and a member of the Dean's Council, or former member of the Dean's Council. We've got Asher Honigman, who's got the Soberman Award for young graduates, I think is the award. He's founder and CEO of Advocates for the Rule of Law and a litigation lawyer in Toronto. Next to him, I'm going very quickly, I'm sorry, but I do want to honor these graduates, your fellow alumni. Loretta Ross, member of the Hollow Water First Nation in Manitoba, and she's the Treaty Commissioner for Manitoba at the moment, and a graduate of Law 89, which we were in the same class together back then, over 30 years ago. And finally, wrapping up, Pam Cross is another award recipient. Just a wonderful and dedicated lawyer in Kingston whose work tirelessly for access to justice, the rights of women in all contexts. And we're delighted to honor all of these alumni for their work. And I just want to say this is just an example of the tremendous value that Queen's Law grads make to the world. That's really the bottom line. What are we about? We want people like this to go out into the world and make a difference. And they do, and you do. And so I want to pause and thank you all for your contributions to society. And that's the greatest thing that we can say about what we've done here. Ross, how am I doing for time?
When your dean instructs you to cut him off, what do you do?
Cut him off. Yeah, I think I would like to hear from other people, and I know that our alumni here this evening would love to hear from students in particular and faculty members. So I'm going to stop there.
Well, thank you so much, Dean Walters. Next, we're going to hear from our Associate Dean of Graduate Studies and Research, Professor Josh Carton.
Thanks, Ross. As Ross mentioned, my name is Josh Carton. I'm a professor and the Associate Dean for Grad Studies and Research. If people have questions about our graduate program, I'd be very happy to answer them. But Dean Walters asked me to talk to you a little bit about my research, which is mostly on commercial arbitration in Canada and internationally. Arbitration now has a central place in commercial dispute resolution. But despite its prominent role, the actual practices of arbitrators, the mechanisms for career development in the field, and the character of the justice arbitration provides remain sealed inside what has been called a black box. Anyone who's appointed an arbitrator and had to rely on word-of-mouth reports from lawyers who appeared before them will understand the problem. Most arbitrations are confidential, and it's hard to collect robust data on a professional community that's heterogeneous, porous, multinational, and difficult to penetrate. I'm excited to be co-lead investigator of a multinational team studying commercial arbitration across Europe. Empirical research of this kind is slow and expensive, and the project is made possible by a £1.1 million grant from the British government, hence the focus on Europe. We think it's the largest grant ever awarded to study arbitration. Progress has been slowed by the pandemic, but by the time we're done, we will have analyzed thousands of survey responses and conducted more than 500 interviews in 54 countries, from the Atlantic Ocean to the steppes of Central Asia. The project involves surveys, interviews, and experiments on arbitrator decision-making. This mixed methodology leverages the expertise of our team, which includes not just lawyers, but also sociologists and psychologists. The size of the project makes it possible to go beyond the handful of leading practitioners in major cities to develop a 360-degree view of how arbitration is actually practiced across Europe. Now, I should be a good cautious social scientist and not present any conclusions until all the data are in, but I wanted to share with you some preliminary observations. For example, we've noticed stark differences between countries on matters like how much it's appropriate for an arbitrator to push the parties to settle, how much counsel are expected or permitted to help prepare witnesses, and more expected findings like different opinions on the reasonable scope of document disclosure. One interesting finding about professional development is that even for counsel with a mostly domestic practice, experience with a different legal system is prized. In some countries, although perhaps unsurprisingly not the UK, education and work experience abroad is crucial for breaking into the field and for advancing within it to start getting work as an arbitrator. But perhaps our most noteworthy finding so far is just how much variety of perspectives remains, even within a single jurisdiction. Understanding these patterns is important, since the flexibility of arbitration means that individual preferences of arbitrators and counsel can have a big impact on procedure, evidence gathering, and the approach to the governing law. For example, Sweden is known as a major arbitration center, and the Stockholm Chamber of Commerce has an international reach and importance far beyond Sweden's economic footprint. One Stockholm-based lawyer estimated that as much as 90% of all commercial disputes in Sweden are arbitrated. But in Linköping, not a large city, but an industrial and IT hub, there appears to be practically no arbitration at all. Similarly, in Italy, there's a huge north-south divide in the prevalence of arbitration and in how arbitrations are conducted. In nearly every country studied so far, we found these micro-regional differences in arbitration practice. What's fascinating about these patterns is how contingent they are. They appear to be based on no more than historical accident and path dependence, which become entrenched over time in the professional cultures of local bar communities. I'm sure we would find similar patterns in Canada given the chance to look, so someone needs me, give me a grant so I can find out. Before I sign off, I also wanted to take this opportunity to make a short plug. In June, Queen's launched a new journal, the Canadian Journal of Commercial Arbitration. CJCA provides opportunities for upper year student editors working for course credit and a further dozen first-year student volunteers to gain experience in arbitration law, interact with authors, and hone their editing and production skills. I co-founded the journal and serve as the managing editor. We have a stellar team of senior lawyers and scholars who serve as executive editors and members of our editorial advisory board. The first issue is available for free on our website, and the second issue will come out around the end of this year. We also have a blog that keeps its finger on the pulse of arbitration developments in Canada and abroad. Check us out at cjca.queenslaw.ca. Thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed your homecoming.
See, Dean Walters, that's how it's done. Right on time. Thank you, Professor Carton. Next, we have my very own 1L criminal law professor, Professor Lisa Kerr.
Well, thank you, Ross. Nice to see you here, and good evening, everyone. I'm going to use my few minutes to share with you some of the activities of the criminal law group at Queen's. So next slide. So this wonderful first photo is our criminal law faculty along with some of our top students. And as I look across, I look at these students and I see some who are headed off to judicial clerkships, some who are articling in Crown Attorney offices, and some who will be or are already joining the defense bar. And since we have a fairly young faculty in this area, I hope it's somewhat difficult for you to tell who is a student and who is a faculty member. I hope it's particularly difficult for you to tell that with respect to the woman in the yellow sweater. So next slide, please. So I'm going to discuss the research activities of my colleagues in this group. And the first up is Lisa Kelly. Lisa teaches criminal law, the law of evidence, a seminar on reproductive rights. She joined us about 3 years ago after doing a PhD at Harvard. And she's already, at just 3 years, an award-winning teacher. She's extremely brilliant in the classroom. And recently, she's been doing some very interesting work with respect to the pandemic. She has a longstanding interest in disciplinary authority in public schools over students. So she's now collaborating with Sonia Lawrence at Osgoode Hall on a project called The Rules of Reopening. And if you take the next slide. And so she's recently published sort of an appetizer to that project, an article in the Toronto Star, an editorial, looking at how to deal with students who don't comply or who are unable to comply with the rules around masks, around social distancing, testing, and so on. You can imagine how difficult that is for some kids, depending on their personal circumstance. So she's sort of looking broadly at how COVID-related rules and policies are being enforced in high schools in Ontario, and with specific attention to race and class. Next, please. Next up is Daryl Robinson, who you'll see in the bottom right of this screenshot from a Zoom. Daryl is one of the more senior members in our group. He's also an experienced practitioner. He spent many years working at the International Criminal Court in The Hague, and he's pretty famous when it comes to the world of international criminal law. And exciting news for Daryl this summer, he finished his PhD. He's been a professor for many years, but he wanted to get that final sort of check mark on his credentials. And he finished his PhD, and it was a little sad that he had to do his dissertation defense over Zoom, but he looks happy enough in that photo, and I'm sure the important thing is just to get it done. Now, for most of us, the only people who read our dissertations are our mothers and our doctoral supervisors, and in some cases, the latter, it doesn't even happen, but not for Daryl. He already has his dissertation under contract. It will be published, if you take the next slide. It will be published by Cambridge University Press in the coming year. And it's called, he's got a great title. I've been talking about this title with him for about a year, Justice in Extreme Cases, Criminal Law Theory Meets International Criminal Law. So that's very exciting. He's now doctor officially, and he's got this book coming out. Next, please. Ben Ewing is another one of our fairly recent hires. He comes to us with rather sterling credentials, a JD from Yale Law School, a PhD in politics from Princeton. And I feel like if I had degrees from those places, I would be very insufferable. But somehow Ben is incredibly humble and warm, and he's also a wonderfully dedicated teacher. So we're thrilled to have him with us at Queen's. His current research projects, next slide, please. He's looking at how the criminal justice system should respond to crimes committed by people from disadvantaged backgrounds, which is a very broad and important problem. And he's publishing all over the place a recent essay in this applied ethics textbook. And he also did an essay this past maybe year and a half ago called Socializing Punishment, about how to think about really the rise of Bernie Sanders and sort of progressive politics in the United States and the problem of mass incarceration. Next slide, please. One of the things Ben does in terms of his administrative contributions at the law school is he runs our MOOC program. Our MOOC program is a really central part of the Queen's experience. It's something our students absolutely love and get so much out of. This year, Ben helped to host the Grand Moot. This is an opportunity to showcase our best advocates, and they try out over the course of the year, and 4 finalists get to moot in front of a leading appellate jurist. And this year we were able to hold the Grand Moot online, and it was attended and adjudicated over by Justice Jamal of the Ontario Court of Appeal. Next slide. Next up is Noah Weisbord. And Noah's had a lot of attention over this past year with the publication of his book, The Crime of Aggression, The Quest for Justice in an Age of Drones, Cyber Attacks, Insurgents, and Autocrats. I feel like his publisher must have loved that title, or at least the person in the marketing department, because it's a fabulous title. So he's got that book out, and that's a book about international criminal law. More recently, Noah has been turning his attention to the domestic criminal law in Canada. He's got a big project with many research students looking at the new, fairly new, is passed under the Harper government, a new law of self-defense. And he's comparing this new self-defense law to a perhaps more notorious self-defense law, the Stand Your Ground law in Florida. He's got an article coming out on that in the Queen's Law Journal, another in the McGill Law Journal. And there's a big Supreme Court case coming up called R.V. Kill. And it's about a self-defense case in the case of a military reservist advancing self-defense. So no doubt Noah's scholarship is going to have an influence on the litigation of those issues before the Supreme Court of Canada. Next slide. If you're interested in Noah's book, punch our names into YouTube. We did a little interview with one another. This is my opportunity to pretend that I was some kind of morning talk show host. And I just asked Noah about his book, and we had kind of a fun conversation. So that video is there if you have any interest in that. Next, please. That brings me to me, and much of my work is focused on sentencing and prisons. And so early on in the pandemic, obviously, there were extraordinary concerns about what would happen in our institutions, jails and prisons and so on, congregate living facilities that were particularly vulnerable to COVID outbreaks. So early on, I did some work in sort of public discourse, trying to articulate a principled case for early and compassionate release. And the Queen's Prison Law Clinic, which is one of our experiential learning opportunities at Queen's, did some of that work. And in fact, secured one of the only early compassionate or medical releases from the federal prison system for someone who was very ill and who in fact subsequently passed away, but he did so at home thanks to the work of the Prison Law Clinic. I recently also published an article on how the law of bail or pretrial release has been influenced by the COVID-19 factor, and the short answer is that it has been strongly influenced by the pandemic. I also have sort of a longer term research project looking at how race and problems of systemic discrimination can be addressed at sentencing in a criminal law matter. And there's a big case coming up on that, a case called Morris out of Toronto. And that's soon going to be heard at the Ontario Court of Appeal. So I intend to continue writing and working on those topics. Next slide, please. This is my favorite slide. I'm also on parental leave right now, so most of my work has actually been focused on these important figures, my two sons. This is my pandemic baby, born at the end of May, and his big brother. So let me just close, last slide, please. Let me close by mentioning our senior and most cherished colleague, Don Stewart. Many of you will know Don. Many of you will have had him for criminal law and criminal procedure. Many of you may not have been able to get an A on his exam because they're very, very hard. Now, Don is he of course has had a profound influence on Canadian criminal law for many years. He's now officially retired, although we sort of joke at Queen's that we throw retirement parties for Don on Friday night, make speeches, have drinks, and Monday morning he's sitting in his office at 9 a.m. So he continues to work at the law school, and he's teaching one class now for us called Criminal Procedure. And it's interesting, he's 78 years old. This may be his last year that he teaches, although I hope not. He didn't flinch when he was asked to move this course to remote online teaching and learning. He said, absolutely, I'll do that. I don't know a lot of professors who would have done that after a probably 40-year teaching career, to just say, absolutely, I'll sacrifice and take on that challenging task alongside my colleagues. So we're grateful to Don. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Kerr. I also really, really hope Professor Stewart sticks around for at least one more year. Next, we're going to have the Stephen Seartson Professor in Corporate Law and Finance, Professor Robert Yeldon, speak to us.
Thank you, Ross, and welcome to my virtual classroom. This is where I've been giving lectures for well, 3 times a week now since the beginning of term. It's not what this room was initially intended for, but it's been working out just fine. Before I joined Queen's in the autumn of 2018, I spent many years in private practice, 25 in fact, at a law firm called Osler, Hoskin and Harcourt. And during that time, I had a really strong interest in legal education, maintained it over the years. I was teaching on the side at different law schools and very much involved with the firm's student committees and recruiting. And of course, as a result, I had my fair share of calls from law schools asking for donations. And I was always happy to give. I was even happier when I could convince my firm to give. But to be honest, sometimes I wondered what impact these donations were really having in the law schools. Well, I can tell you after 2 years as a faculty member at Queen's that I've seen things now from the other side, and I can report back to you that the difference your support makes to this faculty is enormous. And the business law area is just a wonderful example of what you've done for your law school. Could we have the next slide? By stepping up and supporting the creation of the David Allgood Professorship in Business Law, which my colleague Professor Mohammed Kimji holds, the other person with the guy with glasses in that slide, and then after that, supporting the creation of the Stephen Sigurdsson Professorship in Corporate Law and Finance. You've literally transformed the business law program at Queen's. You've turned it into one of the core areas of interest at the faculty. We now have 3 full-time faculty members teaching essential courses in business law, including, of course, Associate Dean Gail Henderson, also in the slide, and thereby adding to the leadership that Professors Cofield and Leahy bring to the tax area. Professor Cofield's in that slide as well. And the very important work that our adjunct faculty members perform in ensuring that we can offer a really diversified mix of business law courses. And I really want to underscore that Queen's is now one of the very few law schools in Canada that has this kind of bench strength in this area. It's a remarkable accomplishment for the faculty in a short period of time, and we really are offering our students now a first-rate educational experience in business law. Now, you might ask, well, what's all that mean in practice? Well, let me give you a quick feel for what it means. In my brief tenure so far, a little over 2 years, I've taught approximately 450 students. Several of them have taken multiple courses with me, be it the Introductory Business Associations course I teach or one of the upper year courses that I've taught on structuring business transactions, corporate finance, or corporate governance. And it's been wonderful to see them evolve over that 2-year period and really see them come into their own. So just one professorship makes a huge difference to the mix of experiences that your faculty can offer to students. And of course, Professors Kimji and Henderson are also bringing a great mix of courses to the table. And we have real depth and breadth in the mix of courses that we're offering. The pandemic, of course, has forced us to change the way in which we're teaching this year. But actually, it's allowed us to try out some innovations that I know I'm going to be seeing if I can't build into the course in future. Believe it or not, there's actually something to be said for Zoom breakout rooms when you're teaching as large a class as business associations. In addition, we now have a number of graduate students in the area. For example, I have an LLM student and a PhD student whose work I'm supervising, and another LLM student in the pipeline. Now, on the research side, having dealt with getting courses up and running, I am very much involved in research and writing. I've just published a substantial article I've been working on for some time on the regulation of defensive tactics in mergers and acquisitions transactions. It's just come out in the Canadian Business Law Journal. And one of the great pleasures of joining the faculty was being able to sit down with my colleagues early in the year to work through a draft of that and get their feedback on it. It made an enormous difference to my own thinking on the area, and it really is something that wasn't something I couldn't do in practice. So it's been a marvelous side of joining the faculty. I have a review of a book on the foundations of Anglo-American corporate fiduciary law that's coming out next year in the American Journal of Comparative Law. And again, I've got really valuable input from my colleagues while working on that. And I'm in the process of putting the finishing touches on an article on provisions in the Quebec Business Corporations Act that are designed to help small business. And that's going to come out in a book of essays marking the 10th anniversary of some very substantial reforms to the Quebec's corporate law that took place in 2011. Importantly, students have been helping me as research assistants on all these projects. And again, it's thanks to the creation of the Sigurdsson Professorship that we're able to give them that experience. In closing, I really would be remiss if I didn't mention that Steve Sigurdsson, who was a graduate of this law school in 1984, was someone I knew and worked with for many years. We were partners at the same firm at Osler, where he went on to be one of the managing partners, and he did something not many managing partners are able to do. He finished the job with the respect and affection of his colleagues, which is a testament to the kind of person Steve was. In fact, before I became a partner, he was a patient, good-humored, extremely talented mentor to this young associate who was learning the ropes. He made an enormous difference to me then, and he's continuing to do so now. So I just close my remarks by saying what a great honor it is to be the inaugural holder of a professorship that commemorates his work, but that, as I hope you can see, is also ensuring that your faculty and its students benefit from his legacy. So thank you for making all of that possible. You really are making an enormous difference to the students today and to the long-term success of your faculty. So back over to you, Ross.
Thank you, Professor Yalden. So we now are going to move on to a couple student speakers, which unfortunately means you have to hear from me a little bit more. But before that, I just want to take a moment to let you know that after the three student speakers, we're going to have a brief amount of time for some questions and answers. Unfortunately, we're having a little bit of technical difficulty with the Q&A forum. So if you have questions for any of our speakers tonight, please just add them to the discussion and we'll communicate them to our speakers. To be honest, it took me a while to decide what I was going to speak to you about tonight. What does one say about an event that we've all experienced personally? COVID-19 has changed all of our daily lives. I think uncertainty is the word that I've come to associate with the pandemic most strongly. And law students are feeling this uncertainty acutely. I mean, there's really nothing worse than uncertainty for a school of 600 type A individuals. It's been hard. Finding the motivation to get up and sit in front of a screen all day, even with this great new 15 seconds commute, it's a major test of mental fortitude. But we're finding ways to cope. In fact, the LSS is now working with the faculty to find ways to build the community atmosphere and spirit that I'm sure you all remember from your time at Queen's Law. It, of course, like everything, won't quite be the same, and it may be like this for a while. But whenever I get discouraged about the state of things around me, I look to the newest members of our community, this year's 1Ls. Each one of them, in spite of all of this uncertainty, decided to take a leap of faith and come to Queen's Law this September. Some of them moved across the country, away from their families, so that they could join us here. And they have shown up like you wouldn't believe. There are a record number of new clubs this year, and existing clubs being re-ratified. Our 1L council elections just wrapped up this week, and where we saw a 4-way race for the 1L presidency. Things are changing here. They have to, but change can be good. We've been granted an opportunity to reinvent our community the way we want to see it in these unprecedented circumstances. For instance, just this Wednesday night, Dean Walters, Assistant Dean Drew, who isn't here on the call tonight, and I hosted a virtual town hall where over 100 students participated and showed up to talk through ideas about how we can make our community more connected and engaged as we stay online throughout the winter semester. We're responding to the challenge and will continue to respond with optimism and resilience. I mean, times are tough, but together we're making it through. And I just want to say that I'm really grateful, and I want to take a moment to thank our professors and our administration, and especially Dean Walters, for all of their support and compassion as we adjust and continue to adjust. As we're all finding, we have to take it one step at a time. We're doing it together, and that's been good so far. I'm sure the winter will bring its own challenges, but I'm confident that we will be able to rise and meet those challenges. Anyway, that's enough from me. Our next speaker is actually one of those courageous 1Ls I just mentioned. Sarah Mohiuddin, sorry, is our next speaker, and she'll join us now.
Hi, thank you so much, Ross. As you mentioned, my name is Sarah Mohiuddin, and I am a 1L student. So I want to start by thanking Dean Walters, Dr. Drew, and the rest of the Queen's Law Administration for all of their kindness and their compassion. From the moment we accepted our offers, their open communication helped to make this transition as smooth as it could be, all things considered. For the class of 2023, the world looked incredibly different when we submitted our applications. For most of us, our acceptances didn't roll in until after the world began shutting down. The juxtaposition of starting law school, a dream we'd yearned for, in the midst of a global pandemic was surreal, starting with our orientation held entirely over Zoom. To be honest with you all, orientation week over Zoom was awkward. We certainly couldn't fall back on forming connections organically. Trying to have those authentic, genuine conversations with people we'd never met through a screen was strange and unfamiliar. Eventually, thanks to the QL administration and community's adaptability, we were able to overcome that initial awkwardness of online learning. Learning from orientation week to help make classes better allowed this process to become more and more smooth as the weeks went on. We're entering our 7th week of 1L now. When we started, the experience was totally unfamiliar. Theoretically, starting law school in a pandemic sounds like an impossible situation. Thankfully, we get to experience law school at a time of technological innovation. None of this would have been possible if not for the internet. Instead of getting to know each other in our law building between classes, we were connecting online. Instead of going to events to learn about extracurriculars, we applied and met our teams over Zoom. Our classes obviously look very different than yours did. We log on to video conferences for hours every day, sometimes only seeing our professor, other times watching all of our peers reacting to some of the sillier cases we read about. The Zoom fatigue is inevitable, but the QL admin were receptive and flexible, and as soon as we were able to do so safely, we had our first lectures in person. We've had in-person lectures for just about a month now, and it's finally starting to feel like we're in law school. We're navigating our classes with our small sections, trying to balance the mountains of readings, and making sure we're prepared for contracts so we don't sound like a fool when Professor Bala cold calls us. We also get to see parts of campus I'm sure we wouldn't have otherwise, to hold our classes of 40 in lecture halls that accommodate hundreds of students. Take our crim class hosted in a lecture hall in the science building. Aside from sitting at a distance from each other and wearing our masks, it's just like a regular lecture. While our first interactions with each other may have been through breakout rooms and private messages, now we congregate outside of after our lectures and have socially distanced hangouts while the Kingston weather is still forgiving. The class of 2023 is embracing the unknowns and the uncertainty along with the rest of QL, who have welcomed us with open arms. Our admin is incredibly accommodating, our professors are gracious and understanding, and our LSS President Ross, through a buddy program, has helped us connect with upper years who are so excited for us to be here. Truly, we're just trying to keep ourselves and others safe, comply with Kingston public health recommendations, and survive 1L. On a serious note, I've often wondered how our unique present will be memorialized. When we'll reminisce about our first year of law school, what will we remember? I'd like to believe that once times finally feel precedented again, we'll hold on to the same kinds of memories as some of you do. Maybe we'll laugh about how nervous we were for this part of our lives. Maybe we'll look fondly to the friends we've made. Or maybe just knowing that no one but us, the class of 2023, will understand what it was like to start law school during a pandemic will tether us to each other. Thank you and happy homecoming.
Thank you, Sarah. Next, our final speaker tonight is Denise Samadi. Denise is in 3L this year. She's an angel to many of us in the lower years. She's always ready to lend a hand or offer some key advice. You're up next. Denise, you're muted.
Apologies, there was a bit of a technical issue. Thank you so much, Ross, for your kind introduction. I would also just like to thank Dean Walters, the professors and administrators participating and hosting this virtual panel. But most of all, I would like to thank the alumni for tuning in. Your support is vital to our continued success. So thank you for your time and your attention. I've been asked to speak a little bit to the class of 2021 and their experiences this year. And of course, that's a little bit unique because we fondly remember our first year and a half of law school. Prior to the pandemic, we remembered memories of our first year orientation and getting coffee with fellow students at Tyndall Field, waiting amongst a sea of students exiting and entering the big auditorium in 001. A lot of really simple things that we took for granted at the time. So these are very strange times for us with new challenges for students beyond just the classroom and learning. For example, with respect to our mooting program, which Professor Kerr touched upon, students who previously had opportunities to moot at courts across Canada are now facing the reality of presenting virtually for the first time. For example, I'm participating as an oralist in the upcoming Laskin moot, presenting an appellate argument for a vaccination exemption with respect to a pandemic response. So it rings a few bells. As well, the Queen's Law Journal is transitioning to online delivery. Our student clinics and extracurricular organizations have to be much more creative in the events that they plan and how they engage with students just in general. And we're all trying our best to enjoy these practical learning opportunities and enriching experiences as much as possible, despite the circumstances beyond our control. I'd also just like to briefly speak a bit about job recruitment, as it's a really important part of every law school experience. We go through law school to hopefully one day find fulfilling careers, like many of you have now. And my year is the first cycle of recruitment in this new normal. So going through the articling recruit, we actually just yesterday morning at 8 a.m., the third year students had their first calls for articling recruit. And I'm sure some of you remember fondly receiving those calls from employers who are excited to meet you, or perhaps making those calls yourselves on behalf of your workplaces. And understandably, the events of the last few months have made students anxious about what's going to happen for them in the next few years. And that being said, the support of Queen's alumni is more important than ever. And I want to personally thank you all for always being willing to chat, having a conversation about your practices and your career trajectories. Queen's alumni have always been very willing to lend a helping hand and keep an eye out for fellow Queen's students. And it makes a huge difference, especially for students who might be the first in their family to go to university or might struggle with other socioeconomic barriers outside of their control. So I know I'm speaking for our entire year when I say we greatly appreciate the support. Your contributions and support mean an incredible deal, especially to the students who, like Professor Yalden alluded to, are able to participate as student researchers and have practical learning opportunities that help them in these endeavors. I myself work as a research assistant for Professor Kimji, and I continuously learn under his guidance, and that wouldn't be possible without your support. So thank you. Lastly, I just want to say, if you have any questions for me and want to hear a little bit about the third year law student perspective, I would be happy to answer those questions. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Denise. So we're going to move into our question and answer period. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties, but if you have questions, please send them through the chat. We're going to start with one. It's going to start for Dean Walters and also the other members of the faculty. What do you think the winter term will look like? Will blended/live online classes be the new normal for the next couple of years?
I'll just give a quick answer to that question. The winter term will look very similar, I think, to the fall term. The public health situation is not changing dramatically. In some parts of the country, as you will know, it's actually worsening. Thankfully, Kingston has remained relatively not immune, of course, but the impact has not been massive. But the provost and the deans at Queen's meet regularly, and the provost has told us don't expect any significant reopening or expansion of in-person teaching. So, yep, it's going to look very similar in the winter term. After that is anybody's guess. It really is hard to say. 4 months ago in March or April, I would have thought surely by now it would be back to normal. No, and it's not. So I guess we just have to keep our minds open to the possibility of having to be responding to this pandemic for the time being. So there you go.
And our three faculty panelists, Professor Curry, you haven't really done much of it yet, except the start of last spring. But what's been the most rewarding part of online teaching and most challenging part of online teaching? We'll start with Professor Carton.
Sure, thanks, Ross. What I'd say was been the most rewarding part, actually, and I'm teaching a course this term that's a discussion-based seminar that's mostly graduate students, a few upper year JD students. And I was really worried that it would be impossible to get a proper discussion going over Zoom. But it's been a lot better than I expected. And in particular, something I've appreciated is that the combination of Zoom and having the chat function means that some of the students who are perhaps shyer to speak in person have been more willing to contribute, either speaking up literally over Zoom or adding their commentary or posting questions in the chat. And it's been a great way to get everybody involved. But at the same time, I've got to say, I really miss the spontaneous chats with students before and after class, and just having those kind of natural, unmediated interactions that are learning experiences on all sides.
Professor Yalden?
Sure. Well, the hardest part, of course, was thinking through how one was going to reconfigure courses in order to deliver them online and through pre-recorded video and build in breakout sessions. And many of us spent the summer working through how to do that, both within the faculty and across the university. There was a lot of support and courses offered to profs as to how to come at it. I must say, I think the first 2 weeks were pretty rock and roll. It was a new world for me, for sure. In this little office, I now have 2 of those huge computer screens in order to manage my introductory business law course, Business Associations, which is a very large group, roughly 100 students. But the positive side, I'd say, is particularly with that class, which, to be honest, I found the most challenging of all the courses I've been asked to teach. Why? Because it's the largest group. It's the most diverse mix of students. It's people who haven't done business law before, some of whom come in thinking it isn't necessarily what they want to do. Sometimes they're pleasantly surprised. Sometimes they're not. But it's a real challenge in a large auditorium, 001, to engage with a lot of students one-on-one. But Zoom has actually enabled me to introduce through the breakout rooms an opportunity to have students talk to each other and learn from each other. And they learn a lot by talking through problems. And so every class, I try to make sure that there's a little bit of time where they can feed off each other and get to know each other, and then come back. And as Professor Carton said, actually, I think it makes them feel more comfortable when they come into the big group and want to share their thoughts about particular issues. So I've actually found in some ways that it's made it a richer experience and a better one for a big class like that. The challenge going forward when we're able to resume in person is going to be, well, how do I take that, the things I've learned by teaching through Zoom and incorporate that back into a live setting. But there's the odd silver lining in all of this.
We have to keep counting them, don't we?
Indeed.
Kurt, you're mainly planning for next year, but are there things that you're looking forward to, worried about?
Yeah, I've obviously, been talking about this extensively with my colleagues, even though I haven't been teaching this term. And I have heard some say that there's a little bit more sort of egalitarianism when it comes to student participation in class, and that they're seeing a sort of broader swath of students participating, whether it's through the chat or, various ways. And that maybe for some students, right, the being in the classroom in a sort of bodily corporal sense adds some pressure and dynamics and things that make them, more quiet. And so that's possible one silver lining, that students are feeling very comfortable in terms of participation. And I guess in the larger comment might be, I know that, and this was something our former dean, Bill Flanagan, talked a lot about, that law teaching was kind of overdue for some technological reforms and updates. And, the notion that we can just kind of walk into a classroom for 2 hours and sort of unload our immense knowledge about complex cases. So I think that for many of us and people I've talked to, we realize there's kind of a core of what we're going to do each class, and you can make a 10 or 15-minute video with that core. And you're going to do that every year for that class. So just make the video, post it, and use the classroom, right? I definitely don't think any of us have learned that we don't need to be in the classroom anymore. I think that if anything, we're going to cherish being together more than ever before. But I think many professors are realizing there's a core of what I'm doing that's the same every year. So let's just record that, do it in a technical way, and then get together in the classroom, call it the flipped classroom or whatever, get together in the classroom and have more meaningful conversation and debate and exercises and so on than just sort of downloading that same material every year. So those are, and I'm extremely worried about it all and how I'm going to catch up to all the skills my colleagues have gained.
Well, I can assure you it's still definitely a work in progress, so you won't be too far behind. Well, Law 80 actually has a reunion starting right now, and we don't want to overstay our welcome and get the engineering faculty mad at us. So we're going to sign off now. I'd like to thank everyone for coming to Queen's very first virtual homecoming. I hope you have a lovely rest of your evening. Stay safe, stay well, and from everyone here at the Faculty of Law, have a great evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks, everyone. Good evening.